Thanks for tuning in to the Women's Vibrancy Code, a podcast dedicated to helping women move from exhausted to energized, balance their hormones, and feeling turned on by their life, their lover, and themselves. I'm your host, Maraya Brown. I'm a Yale and functional medicine trained women's health expert, midwife, mom, keynote speaker, and self-made entrepreneur. I'm the founder of my signature program, the Women's Vibrancy Code. So sit back, relax, and let's chat about your energy, hormones, libido, and embracing your feminine power. Oh, and you might want to have pen and paper to take some notes on some of these episodes. Welcome back to the podcast. So thrilled to have Jenn Pike with me today. And I have a little story first, and then I'm going to read her bio and we'll get into it and we'll talk about really tracking our cycles and figuring out the best ways to move our bodies based on where we are. But I would say about 5 years ago, I was still running the women's health at a local functional medicine practice, leave the kids at home, go see patients, come home. And then a friend and I launched a Facebook group, which kind of went viral. It's called Beyond the Red Tent. And in the midst of that, I found Jenn Pike. And she was doing really cool work in the world with women and their hormones. There was a part of me going, wow, this is the stuff that I've been longing to learn. And maybe I want to take her program. And wait, what is the program? Wait, there are online programs? You opened up a whole can of worms for me. And we interviewed you in Beyond the Red Tent, and then you interviewed Missy and I, and it's been so fun to mutually support one another as we've journeyed, and you've been a beacon for me. And it was through listening to your podcast and learning more about what you were doing that I was like, wait a minute, I can create an online course.
Right.
And it has been nothing less than spectacular. So I just wanted to start, Jenn, by saying thank you.
Oh, well, thank you so much for that. I think it's so important for us as women to live our desires and our what ifs out loud so that other women can witness it and also recognize what's possible and be like, I see myself in the possibility of what that woman is doing. I think that's just as integral part of community and sisterhood as it is the conversation we're going to have today. Yes.
And finding other for me, finding other powerhouse females that are ambitious and there's enough to go around for everyone. And we believe that the universe is abundant and our work is very similar, and yet it's also very different. And of course, I will shout your praises at the mountaintops. And I know that anyone who's listening is going to love this. So let me read Jenn's bio. She is a medical exercise specialist and functional diagnostic nutritionist specializing in women's health and hormones. You'll notice she is Canadian, and you'll hear it in a little bit of an accent. And she's in Kelowna now, which I can't wait to get up there. I can't wait to see it. Okay. She is the best-selling author of 3 books, The Simplicity Project, The Simplicity Kitchen, and The Simplicity Body. She is the fiercely driven founder of The Hormone Project, Synced, and The Audacious Woman. Potentially powerful programs dedicated to empowering and teaching women what they should have known about their bodies all along. The incredible healing abilities, wisdom, and power they hold, and how to bring them to life. Jenn sits on the advisory board for Strong Fitness magazine and serves you up weekly doses of education, wisdom, and inspiration on the Simplicity Sessions podcast. So for those of you here listening on the podcast, if you haven't already subscribed to the Simplicity Sessions podcast, you want to check it out, which has been on Apple's top 200 in health since its debut, September of 2018. And her channel, Simplicity TV, is on YouTube. As an inspired wife and mom of 2, she understands that true well-being as a woman is a journey to be enjoyed, not a struggle to be forced. That gives me chicken skin, goosebumps when I say it out loud. She will inspire you to cut the BS and create more simplicity and ease in all that you do. The Facebook and Instagram and YouTube and synced link are all in the live description if you're watching this live in Facebook, and in the show notes if you're listening on the podcast. Woo! That was a mouthful.
I know. I needed a sip of water and I just listened.
I made my adaptogen elixir today. I used the Mudwater matcha flavor. I'm trying.
Oh, I've not used the Mudwater before, but matcha is, I just can't get enough. Love it.
Yeah, I'm really enjoying. I've been using a lot of Rasa and Four Sigmatic and Inimamundi, and just did my first order of Mudwater, and I'm really enjoying it. Okay. Yeah. So, first, broad strokes. When we think about our infradian rhythm, our 28-day cycle, for a woman who's menstruating regularly, she likely, we can easily have this conversation around when you're bleeding and when you're in your ovulatory time. Here are some things to do for your nutrition and how to move. Just right off the bat, for the women that are listening that are on contraception or beyond menopause, or maybe estrogen-dependent cancer treatment, and their menses are going away, or their menstrual cycles are irregular, for that woman, through what lens should she listen to this conversation?
There's actually a couple. So it'd be very easy for me to say, just simply follow the lunar cycle, because if someone who's listening, they're the type of person where they need like literal instruction, and I don't need it to be woo right off the bat. I need it to be a system that I can follow. Then I would say 100% tune into what the lunar phase is right now of the moon cycle. So the moon for us, moon and lunar interchangeably, we are so connected to the moon and to the rhythms that she moves through. We are so connected to the seasons that happen, throughout the year. But when it comes to the moon moves through on average about a 29.5 day rhythm and cycle. She does not ask permission for that. She doesn't like check in to make sure that's okay with anybody else. It doesn't shift and wane and wax as she does. The cycle is that the rhythms that happen within the cycle are broken into different phases. So for instance, when we have the new moon, which you don't see the new moon in the sky, the new moon, it's like the shadow side. It is really where energetically the moon pulls back, and it's darkness. And that emulates what the menstrual cycle is like in most women's bodies. And it also is very representative of the season of winter, which is where we pull back. It's a very inward, introspective type of energy and vibe throughout the body. And it's actually a highly creative period of time. And when the moon starts to come out of that new moon phase, now you start to see that beautiful edge of the crescent that is starting to come out in the sky. And that's the waxing moon after the new moon. And the waxing is where she's starting to build her energy and her brilliance and her wisdom back up and starting to reemerge. And in our bodies, this is the follicular phase. It's so many women don't realize, because we haven't been taught this from a young age, which is part of your and I's mission collectively, is that when you have a bleed, you literally are shedding an organ. You are shedding the lining of the uterus, and then your body goes through a rebuilding of that. So it's the same thing with the moon. When you start to see that crescent and you start to see the color come back in the sky, that's the waxing. And now this is when energy in full bloom. This is very representative of the season we're in right now, which is spring. We start to see the buds again. We start to see signs of new life and new energy, new possibilities. And then once that full waxing phase is done, now we move into the full moon, which is like, you can't take your eyes off of that moon. Like, it's, the picture behind you. It's beautiful. That's actually the sun setting behind you, but the moon also looks like that. Is that the sun setting, or is that the moon behind you?
It's actually the moon. It's a full moon. Okay.
So perfect. Like it was planned. But that full moon is where this is symbolization of the ovulation, right? So now I want to say this. We get taught a lot about ovulation. Like, ovulation is when you're in your most, divine feminine, and it's when you are this powerhouse and you step forward, and it's when you, feel that desire to do your hair and put yourself out into the world. But for some women, ovulation can actually feel more uncomfortable than the actual bleed week. And that's important to recognize, and we'll talk about why in a moment. But the ovulatory period of time, that full moon, is the shortest phase of all of the phases that we go through. And then we enter what is actually my favorite of the phases, which is the waning moon phase. It's the longest. So the waning gibbous moon phase, we actually move through multiple phases in that phase. And in a woman's body, this is referred to as the luteal or the luteal phase. And it is typically the longest, about 10 to 14 days. So this is that period of time in our body where if you're a woman that not only has a period, but you ovulate, this is like the really important thing to understand, is that that phase in your body is happening after you ovulate up until you bleed again. So this period of time for women can feel very different. Some women, it feels very uncomfortable. It can feel very much like, bad PMS, mood swings, water retention, breast tenderness, poor sleep, digestion is off, all of those different kind of symptomatic things. Energetically, this is that period of time where when I talk about cutting the BS, like our rope for maximum tension and capacity coming into our bleed are coming into this phase of the moon when it's like starting to pull its energy back. So when you look in the sky, this phase we're talking about, you saw this big, beautiful full moon, and now it is getting smaller and it's starting to recede and pull back to the darkness of the new moon. This is really signaling to us in our bodies. This is like the fall, the autumn season. It's like go and harvest, reap what you have sowed, and now pull back and get ready to go inward again. And so for us as women, and especially if you don't have a bleed for whatever reason, you're postpartum, you're on, contraceptives, you're postmenopausal, whatever the reason is, these are really the ebbs and flows that you can tune into. Now, you'll notice when I described the moon phases, I also was very intentional about putting energy around how I was describing it, because regardless of what's happening in the sky, in the cosmos, in the seasons, what is happening in your body? Like, how have you been sleeping? What's going on in your life right now? What is your internal? So we have this infradian rhythm that our body is moving and ebbing through. And then we have life that comes at us. And then our nervous system has a response to our life, what we feel, what we experience, what we consume, like literally and energetically, how we move, all of those different bits and pieces. And then your body shows up and she says to you, this is actually what I have in me today. And so I think above all, and obviously I'm a huge fan of tracking and syncing and all of that, but above all, I believe that as women, we need to be able to tune into how we're really feeling first, and then we can start to layer the moon phases, our actual cycle phases, and go from there.
Absolutely. I love it. I'm so excited to listen to you say this, because I've actually just started a 4-part series that will come out in the podcast that literally goes through our bleeding time, our follicular, our ovulation, our luteal, talking a lot. Like, this is so good. And I'm seeing a number of people talking about it in the world. Yeah. And I'm really hoping that women are hearing this.
Yeah, it's, I think it's one of these things where, for me, cyclical living became part of my life about 7-8 years ago when I sold my in-person studio and business that I had. And that for me was like, the selling of it was like the luteal phase, the fall. And then the year after was the winter. It was the new moon. And it was like, I literally lived like 4 winters back to back on an energy level. I didn't feel the spring in me. I didn't feel a summer in me. I was like, I needed deep rest. I was so tired because I was raising a family. My husband ran a company. I was giving all the best parts of who I was to everyone else. Quite honestly, it was community members, but it was also strangers, strangers who would drop in, strangers on the internet, and my family would get the leftover crappiest parts of me. And so when I pulled back, I literally gave myself an entire year of winter, which was like, what is the minimum I can do and still, live life and do things and, bring a level of abundance into my family and that. But literally, what is the minimum I can do? What is my new calibration of simplicity and ease in my life? And so I think it's also really important to understand that what we're trained to do in society is go, okay, I'm going to do the cyclical living thing and I'm going to get synced up. So I'm going to track it and I'm going to know it. And if I didn't have a good sleep last night, but I wake up and I'm in my follicular phase and I'm supposed to lift heavy or I'm supposed to do a HIIT workout today, well, I'm just going to push and do it because that's the phase I'm in. And then we bypass and we outsource really what our body's asking of us, which is, I don't care if it's the day after my period and it's supposed to be day 1 of follicular and I'm supposed to be on. If everything in my body is saying, can you just lie down a little longer? That's what I'm going to listen to.
Right. to listen and to pay attention to the nuances of all of it. How's my creativity? How's my libido? How's my energy level? Where's the moon? Where am I in my menstrual cycle if I know? And at the end of the day, check in with myself.
Yes.
And is this coming from fear? Is this coming because I drank too much alcohol yesterday or ate a bunch of crap food? Is this coming from I've said yes to too many things and I feel like I'm an acrobat with holding 5 sticks with 5 spinning plates on them, and I simply need to set some better boundaries so that I can feel spectacular, and it's all important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
For the woman who is on birth control pills or the patch or the ring and adding in exogenous synthetic estrogen and progesterone, some of whom, especially ambitious women, are like, oh, I'm just going to skip the placebo pill so I don't have to bleed. Mm-hmm. How do you think that is impacting this innate rhythm?
I think it is really shoving it into your body in a way where it's like, there is a box that could be the treasure chest, but we have just like lock and sealed all of the brilliance and the innate wisdom and connection that we have to our body in there. And I also want to say, like, it's a very personal decision if you're going to take a form of hormonal birth control. And there are many different reasons as to why a woman might choose this for herself. And so there's no like, I don't want to make anyone feel bad about their decision. I was on hormonal birth control for 7 years when I was younger before I really knew and understood what the impact of that was. And also coming to a place where when I started to learn more about it in my 20s, I was like, why didn't anyone actually ask me more questions? Why didn't anyone let me know that this is actually what happens in my body when I'm taking the pill? Because there are, impacts and effects, not just on our hormones, but on our gut health and on our neurotransmitters. So our mood and our emotions, our creativity. There have been so many studies done in the last decade and really prolific ones done in the last couple of years that have even shown that we will select a different mate, a different partner, different, social circles, even different careers in our lives if we are on synthetic hormones.
Oh my gosh. I remember. I remember when I was doing my nurse practitioner training, I went to Yale. It's a pretty good education. And in one of the physiology classes, hearing that a woman on COCPs, meaning birth control pills, literally the pheromones that she smells and is it attracted to are shifted. And I'm 100%. Like, holy macaroni. So all these women that are on the pill meet their partner and then go off the pill when it's time to get pregnant, and they go, he doesn't smell good anymore. I'm not even attracted to him. I go, whoa, this is like mind blown.
It's massive. It's massive. And those pheromones, that is our so when people talk about like people having chemistry together and there being like a chemical reaction and like fireworks that go off, and that our pheromones are a massive part of that. And as a woman, it's so different than a man because our infradian rhythm is somewhere in the 28-ish day rhythm and pattern. And it has these fluctuations and these nuances, which it's supposed to. When we have synthetic hormones in our body, we don't have any fluctuations other than if you take the sugar pill or you stop taking the pill for the 5 to 7 days, which is then what induces the chemical withdrawal bleed. So we end up, it's a very masculine androgynous energy. Because when we're on the synthetics, our pituitary is not functioning the way that it should be. So we're not getting the signaling, we don't ovulate.
Yep.
And here's the thing is that if you talk to majority of women, they will tell you that what they think is the most important part of their cycle is when they bleed. But in fact, the most important part of our cycle and our health is the ovulation. Mm-hmm. So for the entire time that we are on synthetics and we don't ovulate, we are leaving a lot on the table in terms of our health. For women, this is massive for our mental health because without ovulating, we aren't producing progesterone in its natural way. And the body, we have to release that egg in order to do that. And then the body uses that material, from the corpus luteum, even taking it back to the granulosa and the theca cells. But then that progesterone and those metabolites, they cross the blood-brain barrier. So GABA, this is like what takes us out of fight or flight, calms us and soothes us. So for the women who that second half of their cycle either suffer from really bad PMS or PMDD, This is a huge issue. And in all, I've been in practice for over 20 years now in a clinical setting. When you spend enough time talking to women, they may not have been on the pill or contraceptives for a very long time, but those who tend to suffer in a deeper way leading into their period, if you go back in their health history, at some point they were on those contraceptives. And there can obviously be a myriad of other reasons as to why they could be feeling that, but it's definitely a conversation that has to be more normalized and talked about. And women, I just think, listen, you can choose what you want for your health at the end of the day, but you deserve to be more informed about the decision that you're going to make.
Absolutely. And I have a sense of guilt when I've graduated and I was running the women's health. I mean, that's what I was taught. If they have irregular bleeding, put them on the pill. If they have acne, put them on the pill. If they have painful bleeding, put them on the pill. And I think of all of the prescriptions that I handed out until I knew better. And I love that you also highlighted a woman's ownership of her fertility is something personal. And by no means would I want a woman to become pregnant without desiring it.
Yes.
Because there's fear of being on the pill. There are lots of routes to taking control of your fertility or not becoming pregnant if that's you choose, but to do it from an educated place. And yes, synthetic progesterone. For those of you on the podcast to go back, I interviewed Dr. Sarah Hill. She wrote Your Brain on the Pill. That's so worth listening to. And just to really start questioning, well, is this really serving me? And yes, post-birth control pill is a thing, but I don't want to digress too much.
Yeah.
And then you speaking to the power of ovulation, ovulation being the quote unquote main event.
Yes.
That being the place where we need progesterone. Ladies, we want progesterone. And
I think it's also, I just want to say in that the conversation, there's like this huge gap that happens. So I think that we need to be educating our teens and our women in their 20s and their early 30s. So obviously in their teens, and like my oldest she's going to be 17. So I'm raising a 17-year-old daughter and I have an almost 15-year-old son. And we have very open conversations about all of these things, is that our kids need to understand and teens need to understand the role that ovulation plays in avoiding preventable pregnancies. And I will say, like, I am adopted. My mother was 15 when she had me. So I also have a very and I've met my whole birth family and all of that, but I also have a very different relationship and understanding of that because I have firsthand experience of being part of a situation where that happened in a way that was obviously not the desired. 15 and 16 years old, it's not your intention to become pregnant. But I think that if we were to empower teens, instead of fearing them, the conversation shouldn't be, you can get pregnant every day of the month and you want to be afraid of, STDs or STIs. The conversation should be, this is actually what's happening in your body. And this is what you need to pay attention to in your body. And to start that tracking and if they decide to go on the pill, it's at least like they know what the foundation is. And then when they come off, they know the steps and things to get back in place. Women that are in their deep fertility years, helping them to understand the importance of nourishing their nervous system and pituitary and adrenals and thyroid to set up the ovarian health to have a family if they choose to. And then there's this huge ass gap that happens. And then women get to menopause and they go, wait a second, I'm sorry. The period wasn't the big thing. It was ovulation. So I spend a lot of my time now working with perimenopausal women to help them understand, are you ovulating still right now? If you're having more anovulatory cycles, which is a natural part of the progression of perimenopause, what are the things we need to do to support the nervous system, support the adrenals, support the thyroid, bathe your body in all of the nourishment for that, as opposed to what so often happens is, how do you work out harder to lose the perimenopausal weight? How do you stay in a caloric deficit but still build the muscle? We get to this phase where because we're not educated, we're so terrified of what menopause is going to bring that we try and white knuckle, and we actually end up depriving our body as women in our late 30s and in our 40s of so much of what we need so that we can move beautifully into menopause. Yep. So that's really a lot of the talk and teach that I've been doing lately because there's a huge gap.
Yep. So this conversation applies to teens. It applies to women in their 20s, their 30s, their 40s, their 50s, their 60s, and beyond. And for those of you listening, we are going to get into some specifics around, okay, well, what do I do if I know that I'm in my follicular phase?
Yes.
Or my waxing moon phase? What do I do if I know that I'm ovulating? And just one more question for those that are beyond menopause.
Yep.
Do you think that a woman, once she's stopped ovulating and she's no longer having a menstrual bleed, do you think, both from what you see with research and also your clinical experience, do women still have the rhythms and flux of estrogen, testosterone, and progesterone? And how do you think that I'm really curious about this personally. We know a lot about the menstrual cycle, and follicular phase is estrogen dominant and luteal phase is progesterone dominant, and ovulation, we've got a big surge of all of it. But once we cross into menopause, do you think that there's still waves of these sex hormones?
I do. And it is different for every woman. So the journey into menopause really, really indicates this. And so here's the thing is, if you have a woman who, she describes herself as like, I've been depleted for as long as I can remember, or I have been inflamed for as long as I can remember. That woman, when she gets into menopause, and we talk about it in ways like absolute, like I have no estrogen, I have no progesterone, I have no testosterone, I have no DHEA. And sometimes you will see it where you're like, wow, everything is on the floor, like not hugging the floor, it's on the floor. That does not happen overnight. That doesn't happen after one non-ovulatory cycle. That's been a slow brew, and the signs and symptoms have been there for a while, which is why, women listening, it is so important to work with a functional health practitioner throughout and to test. So you have benchmark levels to tune into your body so you know and understand where you're at. That being said, for a whole other host of women, we get to a point where there's a slow unwinding. So it's not like today my ovaries are pumping out a healthy amount of estradiol and my follicular stimulating hormone is super regulated and I have a beautiful, strong luteinizing spike and I ovulate and I have this amazing, robust progesterone and testosterone's right there and then I wake up tomorrow and I've got none of it. Right. It doesn't happen like that. There is like typically what happens in a well-nourished body is that we start to have fewer ovulation-based cycles. So I might still bleed next month, but it doesn't necessarily mean that I ovulated. How would I know that? Some different things that might happen is all of a sudden my cycle starts to get a bit shorter. So maybe I used to have a 27 to 29 day cycle, and now I'm like, oh, I just had like a 24-day cycle. That's interesting. And then the next month, oh, there's another 24-day cycle. And then, oh, there's that 27. And then the next couple months, so we can start to notice the shortening. We might start to notice things like we have a little bit of spotting before we actually have our true bleed, which can be indicative of either a little bit of lower progesterone or the fact that maybe we had an anovulatory cycle. Some women, what they'll notice is that in ovulation, there can actually be a little bit of spotting that happens. And it can kind of just depend, like how much of a surge did you have with estrogen? And if you didn't have progesterone to help to balance and ground that out, we can notice that. But what will happen over time is that the ovaries, instead of like this juicy amount coming out, it's like they start to just eke it out. And it's not that there's none, but the ovaries no longer are the front running, stars of the show. They are like, I have served you for the last 4 to 5 decades. I have like done my job. And now they're really looking upstream. So when we go into actual menopause and we're no longer, the ovaries are not the primary system of reproductive sex hormones, the adrenals really are now stepping up and becoming like that secondary ovarian system in the body. They're not going to be producing the same amount. Like, this is what we have to understand as women. When we are at the stage of late and perimenopause into menopause, and we are journeying to the 12 months of no longer having a bleed, there is no amount of wild yam extract, Vitex, any of that is going to bring those levels back, because it's not supposed to be that way. Now, that being said, bringing in bioidentical hormone replacement therapy, hormone replacement therapy as a whole can be a beautiful adjuvant for women who are really struggling. There are a lot of benefits. If we look back even to when the Women's Health Initiative was done decades ago, it was very poorly done. And now we're starting to see this full circle come forward with the ways in which that study was not actually run very ethically, appropriately, long enough. And now we're seeing it on the other side. So it's just different. So what I say to women is like your adrenal and thyroid health, you need to really be focusing on that, your liver and your gut health.
Yep.
Right. So that's really important. And that'll make the difference between you feeling awful going through it. Like we've been told by our mothers, like, oh, it's the worst. And, you just suffer and you'll forget where everything is. You never sleep again. You're going to gain weight. You're going to be hot all the time. Like it sucks. Or yeah, there was changes and differences in my body, but I just met her along those changes and embraced.
Right.
Yeah.
I love it. I love it. So obviously this applies to everyone. We've got these two bookends of puberty and perimenopause. Mm-hmm. We still have hormones beyond menopause. It's just that they're not coming as much from the ovaries. The adrenals are kicking in. Every cell in our body is producing hormones, bioidentical hormones. Yes, yes. I recently interviewed Jill Shimoleski specifically on bioidenticals. That's worth a listen.
I think it's also important to note as well too, and maybe you and Jill talked about this, but we get so hyper-focused as women on the big three, which is estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone.
Right.
But we have hundreds of different hormones and chemical reactions happening in the body. So if we're not also taking into account our blood glucose, our insulin, our blood sugar, our cortisol, our body, our actual adrenal response in terms of cortisol, but also adrenaline, and how quickly or how much our body is maybe deactivating some of what we need in a day. And those neurotransmitters, that are supporting our mood and our stability. And honestly, our ability to still care. I find that in supporting women on their hormonal journey, we go through this period of time as women where, we're so connected, we're so intuitive, we're so empathetic for others in our life, and we're real nurturers. And then we hit a point where we go from empathetic to apathetic and we don't give a shit. Mm-hmm. And it's just like, I'm so tired now. I'm so exhausted. I've just given myself, you talk about it as the spinning plates. I refer to it as, living through life like you're an octopus with 8 limbs, but really only have 2. And so there's this depletion that can happen for so many women that doesn't have to.
Yep. And is it apathetic or is it unapologetic? Because I also think this transition through perimenopause and menopause, we do become a lot more unapologetic and just fiercely, this is who I am.
I think it can be both, but what I'm talking to in the apathetic is the women who are like, I am just doing what I need to do to survive my day.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about the women that are still leading forward with ambition and wanting to get to a point where they feel like now I'm going to own my life. Like now it's my time. Yep. There's a big difference. And there's also a big gap in between. So it's like anything. I think it's like the yin and the yang, right? We have these women that are quote unquote, rising and strong and powerful and want to achieve. And then we have women sitting on the other side that are literally just really struggling to get through the day. And the point from where this woman is to where this woman is looking over here and is like, oh my, that's just too hard. I'm just going to stay here. And this woman is looking over here and going, well, that's lazy and non-productive. Mm-hmm. And my whole goal in working with women is where's the equilibrium that lives here?
Right. Yes. And we can utilize our infradian rhythm, our 28-day cycle, our lunar cycle, our menstrual cycle as more information to be more purely and potently and authentically ourselves. And I love that you brought up, it's not just our ovaries. It's not just our liver. We want to pay attention to our thyroid and our pituitary and our adrenals and our gut and our inflammation and our insulin levels and all of the hormones, our sleep and the cortisol and DHEA, they're all important. And we don't live in silo. And I think sometimes when it comes to allopathic medicine, it's like, well, what's your lab? What organ are we looking at? What's your diagnosis? What's your drug?
Yep.
And we can't just put a Band-Aid on a specific symptom because it's all interconnected and related. Okay, so you brought up hormones. Let's start with cortisol, I'm thinking. So, I just finished reading Fast Like a Girl by Mindy.
Oh, yeah, Mindy. I am actually interviewing her in a couple of weeks for the podcast.
Ooh, I just actually reached out to her podcast team. I'm like, oh my God, I love what she's bringing. And this idea of estrogen being more resilient to cortisol during the follicular phase and progesterone being kind of afraid of cortisol. Like it needs the rest, it needs the calm, will not necessarily be produced in the context of high stress. Yeah. So with that context, how would you suggest if we start with just follicular and luteal phase, what are some things that women can do? How do you recommend they eat different, exercise different, be different, perform different, expect of themselves differently?
So in the follicular, so if we're going to divide it kind of in half, where the first half of the cycle would be that follicular, which really, that starts to come on the scene typically somewhere around like day 3, day 4 of when we've had our period. So some people will describe it and say it's day 1. Yes. And so from the time that we actually start to have our bleed, the body is doing the release because it's had the signal of all of the hormones dropping low, which is why, and there's no pregnancy. And that's why then we shed, and our bodies are so smart. We go through this incredible, renewable recycling, phase every single month. But then we start to have the climb and the resurgence of estrogen is what's going to come back on the scene first. So we get our first little estrogen surge. Testosterone will start to creep in behind that. And so coming into that follicular phase, this is where a lot of women will say that first, week to 10 days after my period, I feel like my head is connected back to my body. I feel like I have my focus and my clarity back, and I've got my energy, and I'm excited and I'm motivated and I'm ready to go. Right. So this is a great time to then align your lifestyle and your actions, your work, your movement, and those things to align with that energy. So if we talk about it from a nourishment perspective, when you're on your bleed, I want you to think about really high nourishing, mineral rich blood building foods. So amino acids, protein rich foods. I mean, I'm an omnivore, so I am more inclined to lean into animal proteins. I was fully plant-based. I was a vegan. I was raw vegan for a period of time. I was vegetarian. And I've been an omnivore for the last, 15 years now. And those things felt good until they didn't. And just that recognizing as a woman in different phases that we really do require some different nutrients. So that I focus on nutrition wise. And the thing is that when we talk about things like cortisol and insulin and our body's ability to regulate, we actually, that if you are somebody who enjoys fasting, your follicular phase and coming into ovulation is when you can manage a longer period of time fasting. It's when you are going to have a built-in, defense management mechanism system in your body where it's like, I don't feel like I'm being starved. This isn't stressing me out. I'm not going into, hyperreactive mode. I'm not going to start to go in and catabolize lean muscle tissue. So that's that period of time where for women, if you want to go 13 to 15 hours of fasting, if you're somebody who enjoys doing, 1 day a week of a longer fast or a 24-hour fast, I would say though, I'm always very cautious when talking about this, that I am talking if you are living in a healthy body. If you have things that are going on, and I would really encourage you to work on supporting that inflammation or that dis-ease first before you start to layer on some of these things we're talking about, because these can be considered advanced maneuvers for your body. So I think that's really important, and getting women to a place where they are actually getting enough caloric energy in on a daily basis for a period of time before we start to do something like fasting, because most women are living in a caloric deficit. And then they hear all the benefits that fasting can provide, which it can provide so many benefits on a body that is ready for it.
Yep.
So I think that's really important. Movement wise, your follicular phase, this is when you want to be picking up the weights. This is when you do want to challenge yourself. And if you're somebody who typically has done the standardized, periodized way of 3 sets of 15 to 20 reps, I'm going to encourage you to, double down on the strength of what you're building and what you're lifting and decrease the repetition. So you still might do 3 sets. I typically in my follicular phase, I'm doing 4 to 5 sets of no more than a handful of exercises, but I'm doing somewhere in the rep range of like 5 to 10 reps. So I'm going to lift heavier. longer. I'm going to have a longer rest period in between to maximize my body's efficiency. Because the training, the actual lifting is the catalyst. It's where you nudge the body and you're actually tearing down, you're producing free radicals. And so you're stimulating the muscle growth, but now you have to go feed it optimally. You have to rest and recover it optimally in order to actually reap the rewards. So this is our follicular phase. And then coming into ovulation, again, if you're one of the women that you're like, I feel amazing coming into ovulation, mid-cycle is my best time. This is where you can start to tether and bring in some of the high intensity interval training. Now, if you're postmenopausal, it can be referred to as like burst training, is good. But the thing is the amount of time. I'm not ever recommending or building out in any of my programs for women to be doing 45-minute HIIT sessions. If you're doing a HIIT session, it's like 12 to 20 minutes max.
I love hearing that. I'm like, yeah, because I have a full schedule. I can fit it in 12 minutes. Done.
This is it. And then for cardio, for all the women we work with, I just finished beta testing a body recomposition perimenopause program, and all the cardio is walking. I have a lot of women in my community that are massive Peloton lovers. I own a bike as well, and I do enjoy it. But there is a way to titrate that amount so that you are not creating diminishing returns and actually eating into all this precious muscle that you are trying to build on your body as a woman, which if we talk about, currency in terms of hormonal currency and health currency as women in our 40s and beyond, muscle should be what you are investing in the most.
Particularly beyond 35.
OMG. Yeah. It is like when we talk about the ovaries, slowing down their role in production, and we talk about adrenal and nervous system, your muscles are also an endocrine functioning organ. And when you go in and you contract, you are actually releasing myokines into the body and into the system. And this is going to help you. So metabolic health, where so many women are suffering from metabolic syndrome, they're pre-diabetic, it's a bit of a hot mess that's going on in their body. Not going to the cardio to solve this, but going to your weights. If you're at a point where you're so depleted that the strength training, and this is what I say to women, if when you go and you do a lifting session, you use words like, that crushed me and you're wasted for the rest of the day, and now you're exhausted, or you start to feel like you're getting the flu, like you're getting sick the days after, it's too much. So how about you start with yoga? How about you start with bar, Pilates, moving your own body weight before you start to, stack a barbell or dumbbells. And then cardio is walking for so many reasons. Like walking to me is medicine. Yeah. It is therapy. It is free.
What are your thoughts on running? I just had a client ask me this, and she's postmenopausal and she loves to run.
Okay, so here's the key word, she loves. So when I have women who come to me, and again, like I used to teach at the running room, I've done triathlons, I get it. There is a dopamine hit when you run that is like no other. And that can be therapy as well. So if I have a woman I'm working with who says, I love it, I'm like, okay, I want you to continue to do things you love, but I also want to balance it. I want to anchor it. So that's what I'm always looking to do, is like, I still want you to do what you love, but can we anchor it?
Yep. And it goes back to what you started with, is checking in. I love to run, but today I woke up and I don't love it today.
Yes.
My body says no today, then listen.
Yeah. Yeah. And so when we get past that ovulatory phase, now we're into the luteal phase. Yep. This is where still strength training, like I'll lift throughout my whole cycle, but I change now the way in which I am doing it. So I'm going to maybe do fewer sets, but I might increase the volume. So progressive overload is not just about lifting heavier, fewer times. Progressive overload can be volume based as well. So it could be lighter weight or no weight other than your own body weight, but now you're doing 20, 25, 30 repetitions. Yep. So when I'm coming into that phase, if I'm doing an actual lifting session, then I'm probably going to be doing reps between 10 and 16. When I'm teaching at that time, I teach majority of my bar and my Pilates classes in that phase where it's about the 10 to 14 days before I know my bleed is going to start. And for a few reasons. So number one, we now that estrogen has had its first little dip. And if we ovulated, hopefully we're having this onset of progesterone climbing. But when we lose some of the estrogen, the tensile and ligamental structure in our body is not as strong and stable to manage the heavier load, jumping, plyometrics. So we have an increase in injury. And for most women, if we go into the body and we look at the sacrum, which is sitting posteriorly to the uterus in the womb, and it is meant to nutate that sacrum and the sacroiliac joints, the SI, which is like the heart of the pelvis. There's a lot of vulnerability. And so if you also find that you get more emotional coming into your period, and if you don't have a period anymore, you just have certain times a month where you're like, whew, this feels like when I used to get my period. You might also notice you get the achiness in the back, all of those things. Then this is not a time where I would be telling you to be doing heavy back squatting and hinging movements like deadlifting and cleans and that type of stuff. The bar and the Pilates is going to bring you back into your body using your body. It's going to work all the kinesthetic muscles. It's going to help you to knit those muscle fibers and that neuromuscular facilitation. It puts your head into the muscle, so you build up all of the foundational strength. So now when you come back into your follicular and your ovulatory phase and you're ready to have a more robust workout, you have already trained all the small little soldiers to be able to stabilize the big muscles when you go and perform.
I love it.
And then when you're coming into your actual bleed, you don't have to lie on the couch for 72 hours. I mean, some of you may, sometimes you might, right? Like you have to listen to your body. But first couple of days, walking. I love using the Gorgeous Ball by Jill Miller to get in and actually do uterine and diaphragmatic massage. It supports the vagus nerve. It is really wonderful for women who do have the back achiness. I use it with a lot of our clients who had endometriosis and adenomyosis, because with that type of pain, it radiates down into the legs. And so if we can get in and do that intrauterine massage, it's literally like you're going in and swaddling your body as a woman like you would for a baby to calm them. It's what it can provide for us. And so those first few days, I'm a huge proponent of like, you need to just pull back. And what I love about training based on these phases is that you automatically add in on average a 3 to 5 day week of deload. So what's so beautiful about training your body in accordance to phases and cyclical living is that you build cross training in. You're not trying to do the same program 5 days a week, week over week, and then wondering why nothing is changing. Or for women who are moving into menopause, they haven't changed what they're doing, but their body is changing and not in a way that they enjoy.
Right. How often do we hear that? I'm doing all the same things, but my body's not responding. Say again the ball that you mentioned.
It's called a Gorgeous Ball. If I was in my room, I have one in multiple rooms in the house, and I use it in so many different ways in what I teach. So we use it as a strength mechanism, but it's about this size, and it's like the color of my shirt, and you fill it, you blow it up with a straw with your own breath and air. And it's wonderful because it can have different densities. So if we're using it for strength, we're going to have it to its maximum density and it's going to be firm. When we're doing, I do massage through the whole body with it, but when it's in the belly, you want to only have it about 70% full because you're lying on top of it. And it can be very confronting for people if they've never done abdominal massage or no one's ever spent time in that area of their body. It's not just what you're feeling in terms of like your psoas and muscle and uterine. It's very emotionally charged. And so some women will say, I feel nauseous. Other women will be like, why am I crying? It's just it's a beautiful tool. And I really like to introduce women to things that they can use anytime, anywhere in their own privacy. And you can't unfeel what you feel in response to that. It's not me telling you what to feel. This is literally your body's own feedback.
Right. And it's the place of our hormones. It's the place of our sexuality. It's the place of our creativity and fertility.
Confidence, identity, self, all of it.
And we spend so much time sitting with this crunched in deflated part movement in that part of the body to open it up and expand. I could see how potent that would be. Okay, I want to make sure that we have time for you to speak specifically about synced, because this is directly related to a lot of this conversation. Mm-hmm. Before I go there, you mentioned the idea of ovulation or that full moon time being the time that most women feel spectacular. Mm-hmm. And occasionally there's a woman who has like an ovulation, almost like flu symptoms, yes. Or they really they feel like they want to crawl out of their own skin mm-hmm. with all of those hormones. And I want to make sure that we speak to that.
Yeah. So that, and this is where functional testing can play a role. And I also want to say to that, it's like functional testing plays a role, but your signs and symptoms and listening to your body is also a huge part of this. So testing at the right times of the month. So for that woman who says to me that her ovulation is feeling like that, I may do one of two things, and I might do both. So I'll definitely test her blood about 5 to 7 days after ovulation so that I can understand and see what is actually happening with her estradiol and with her progesterone specifically. And then I may do a Dutch complete test at that same time, or I may do a cycle mapping test. So the difference now, when we're in perimenopause, to try to time things perfectly when it comes to hormonal testing,
right?
It's a bit of a crapshoot, depending on at what phase you're at. And it's not across the board for every woman. So I'm never going to say like, oh, I would never run this test in this age, because like you and I are similar in age, but could be at very different points in our journey on this. So you have to take it into account what's going on in her body. The difference is if we do a cycle mapping test where she's urinating every single day for that entire cycle, we're going to catch all the highs and lows, the surges and all of that. And it can help us to understand, was this an ovulatory phase? Was it not? With a Dutch complete, it's all happening over a 24-hour period of time. So it's giving us a snapshot into that, a little bit of historical data, but again, you've got to lay it up to her symptoms. So for that woman, often, not always, often what I'll see is that her estrogen is riding a little bit higher in relation to progesterone. It doesn't mean that she has this like crazy excess amount of estrogen. It just might mean she could have very healthy estrogen, but not enough progesterone to help to balance. So the symptoms that come on can be a swing of that. The other thing we have to take into account is that there are other hormones that come on the scene. So prostaglandins can be released as well. Prolactin can play a role in this. Mm-hmm. And so again, depending on this woman's body and her inflammatory response and how good her body is at regulating, the increase of these hormones can make things feel off. Right. Breast, mood, water retention, achiness, sore throat, I'm getting sick, don't touch me, I want to be like all of those types of things. And this is what we have to lean in and trust, because every hormonal cue or message our body gives us is actually trying to protect us and get our attention.
And I also wonder, is it a woman who is not ready to feel her fierceness, her big, expansive, full moon, fully expressed, hormonally exploding time?
Yeah, it may not feel safe for her. And this is the thing, is that we can talk a lot about like the chemistry, the biology, the physiological response of what's happening, but there is always a mental, emotional, psychospiritual component to that. Yeah. And if you look at, any of the literature, I mean, you can go back decades ago to, You Can Heal Your Life by Louise Hay, and look at every dis-ease. Everyone has this book, right? Every dis-ease in the body.
This one too.
Yes. So if you look at that and things that have to deal with the uterus and with our cycles and with that, a lot of it comes down to not feeling safe, safe enough to be seen, to be heard, to be honest, all of that. Not maybe having been in an environment where your femininity and your divine, power as a woman was celebrated, but in fact was shamed and dismissed.
Oh my God, your creational ability, your ability to create life, all of it. And we could have this conversation about each of the chapters and areas of infradian rhythm. It's so important and so good. Yeah. I think we could talk forever.
Yes.
You mentioned Dutch complete instead of Dutch plus. Are you not a fan of cortisol awakening response?
I'll run that as well too. Again, it depends on the individual. So I don't have like like, this is the only thing I do. It really depends on, and in our clinic and in our setting, we're doing, you know, initial intakes to really understand, like, what is it that this woman needs? Cortisol awakening response is a really powerful one as well, where we can do the saliva, and that can help us to understand. However, if I'm working with a woman who is describing, and I have 5 other functional medicine practitioners in the company. If the woman is saying, I'm surviving my day, I can't get off the ground, I can't wake in the morning, it takes me forever to get going, I don't need to have her pay for a cortisol awakening test. I'm pretty certain we know what's going on, and we're going to start to do things like get natural light exposure, you know, shift what she's eating in the morning, actually try to nourish and create grounding to help to create sun up, cortisol up energy. We're going to track that over a little bit and see, is she already starting to notice these differences? And if the answer is yes, then we don't need to go and run that test.
Yes. So you drop the mic of red light therapy, you drop the mic of quality fat, protein, and fiber first thing in the morning, and maybe modifying an intermittent fast and not continue it into the morning. There's so much juiciness. I think we could sit here and talk for hours.
And I'll tell you, the top 3 things I see for women who say they can't get up in the morning is they're not getting exposure to natural light. They are fasting until noon and caffeinating themselves with MCT oil to try and stretch the fast as long as they possibly can. They're avoiding the intake of carbohydrates because they're just like, those are the scary things. And they're doing their hardest workout first thing in the morning. And then they're also trying to get the kids off to school, show up to work, you know, be the boss babe. And it's like, that's what we need to work on.
Right. Functioning in a 9 to 5. I expect the same of myself each and every day. All of it. I heard a Chinese proverb in the last 24 hours. And what it was is coffee steals the energy from tomorrow so that we have it for today.
I would say that that is very true. And I think that that is what so many women are doing to get by now. And it's like, you know, we'll hear in finance world, like you borrow from, you know, Paul to pay Peter to pay Mary, whatever the saying is. And it's like, most women don't realize they are making that exchange every single day. And they're just moving inner debt around and trying to consolidate what they don't want to feel.
Right.
And then we're mad that we don't feel better, look better, move better in the next 30 days. But it's because we're not being reminded enough. And we're not like, here's the thing I will say through and through as to why cyclical living made such a difference in my life and why I decided to make it such a huge part of my company is it is a permission slip for women to stop tuning out and to tune inward and to take back their own personal power.
Yep.
Which when you can do that shows up in everything in your life. In your relationship, how you parent, how you socialize, in your business, your boundaries, like literally everything. Yep. But it takes time. And it is like, I'm 7 years in a 43-year life of really, I mean, I started tracking when I was 17 years old. Yep. I, you know, had a very serendipitous moment at my yoga studio at 17 where Tony Weissler's book, Taking Charge of Your Fertility, literally fell off the bookshelf. They had to borrow a book, lend a book, literally fell off at my feet. And I picked it up and I was like, going to put it back. And the page that it opened up to was graphing and charting periods. And I was like, that's weird. Why would you chart your period? And I stood there and I'm 17. I'm on the birth control pill. I'm flipping through this book. And I was like, oh, this is really cool. And I asked if I could borrow the book. And I took it home and I started on graph paper with a pencil to chart my cycle. And I didn't stop. I've been charting since I was 17, but I didn't know. I didn't realize, because I read it in the book, but you know when you read something, but you don't get it?
Yeah.
That being on the pill meant I didn't actually have a true cycle.
Right.
But at 22, when I came off the pill, when I took my first course that I'd been exposed to in women's endocrinology on a deeper level, it was all about, back then they called it estrogen dominance. All these things just started to click. And I was like, oh my gosh, I've already been preparing for this. And I made the decision to come off the pill at that time. And the chart, it like within a few months, I had this regular, you know, beautiful cycle back on track. And I really do pay homage to that book and that moment happening. But I think that's what it is that we're just so used to like, will you tell me what to do? Will you tell me, well, what does your body tell you to do? Why don't you trust her?
Yep. It's so good. And I'm like you, I've tracked, I don't know, since I was probably 24, and it's almost like I don't need to write it down anymore. I just know.
Yeah.
And now my husband knows, because knows how I'm different and how that affects our sex life and my irritability and my energy level and when I feel totally overwhelmed and why did I commit to all those things, all of it.
Yeah, I want to quit. That's what I say. Right. When I say I want to just go and be a cashier, you know that I am about to start my period.
Right, exactly. Or when I got mad that he moved the hand towels from one drawer to the other in the kitchen, I'm like, okay, I'm not going to say anything, because I know if it's 2 weeks from now, it would not even be a thing.
Exactly.
Okay. Anything else? I think let's talk about Synced. Can you talk about Synced? It sounds like there's an app coming out. The link is in the description. Let's talk about Synced.
So Synced is a program. So I've been a fitness instructor since I was 17, and I've moved through many different variations of that. I've been teaching classes for 26 years now. And when I started to really bring cyclical living into my own life, I've done quite a few fitness competitions, and I was getting ready to train for another show. And I was like, you know what? I am actually going to do all of my training and everything completely based on my body's rhythms this time. I'm going to eat in accordance to that. I'm going to move in accordance to that. And this is actually, it was my second last show. When I was 37, I was doing one. And then when I did my last show at 39, I was going to be turning 40. And I was like, this is how I'm going to go into 40, is I'm going to do my last show on stage. And I really honed in and I created this entire methodology of Synced for my own body. And, 40 years old, I won my pro card. I won 2 divisions. And then I was like, I'm not doing this again. But I really walked away from the experience being like, I was the only one in both of my divisions who did not lose her period in the entire time of training. And I'm like, I really feel like I'm onto something here. And so I created an online studio called Synced. So we have an on-demand library. At this point right now, we have 638 videos in our on-demand library. When you go into the membership site, it is all broken into your follicular / waxing phase, and then your ovulatory / full moon phase, your luteal / waning moon phase, your menstrual / new moon phase. And so you are following and tracking your own cycle, and you go in and select your videos based on where your body is at, either lunar wise, energy wise, or literally. And then we also we teach 8 live classes a week, Monday through Friday in our community. It's myself and I have 4 other female instructors. We've also built these classes out. They are 35 minutes long, and we teach this in a way where it's accessible. It is all based on having, a home gym. We're using small apparatus, your own body weight, and it is everything from strength training with, dumbbells, kettlebells, barbells, your own body weight bands, Pilates bar, yoga, mobility, gorgeous ball work, some circuit training. We have dance that's part of it. There are spin classes that are in there. And we've really just built out this it's one of our most engaged communities of all the programs that we run. It really is a sisterhood of support. We do seasonal meal plans. We do seasonal fireside chats. And it's wonderful. And so that is what Synced is. It's an online movement studio based on the rhythms of your body as a woman. So it's designed for women, led by women, by women. And I'm really proud of it. And so we have an app that's coming out in June, and everything I do is embedded in simplicity. So we are not like Peloton. We are not like Beachbody. We're not trying to be like that. We all teach from our homes. You will see our pets sometimes. You will see our children. I really wanted to build something where the woman who was coming into our studio online saw herself. And didn't see this like perfect studio image where she felt like, well, I don't have that environment, so it's not possible for me. Well, no, like we could do it all right here. And so we are really true to that. And so our app is very simplified. Our app also will connect to your cycle tracking app, to any of your other apps. There's 1,000 different apps that our app will actually sync to. We're part of a collective community. And in that, you will have the different phases that you can go into. to. Okay, I'm on my follicular. I'm going to choose this class. And then we have mini programs. So I teach within Synced something called Synced Express. And so every 8 to 10 weeks, I release about 8 to 10 10-minute videos. And so the 10-minute videos are, you have 10 minutes, you can go move your body. You might want to stack. Maybe you want to do a little bit of, your lower body, and then you want to do some yoga. So you do 10 minutes of lower body conditioning, you round it out with 10 minutes of yoga, you've done your 20 minutes. Or maybe so it's like, I've just taken into account how I love to move my body, how I need to do it with a family and a business. And really listening to the women that are in our community. And our instructors range in age from their, early 30s into their 60s. And so it's also been important to me to build a team that is very inclusive in terms of where women are at different stages of their lives.
I am so grateful for the work that you have created in the world. And all the ways in which you serve women. It's spectacular.
Thank you.
For those of you listening, Synced, definitely check it out. Jenn, all of her social media handles are in the notes. I love the comment towards the end around, this is about an opportunity for us to really get to know ourselves. No longer kind of blindlessly going through the day, putting out the fire in front of us and just asking others to tell us what to do, but actually turning the lights on in the room and looking at the nuances of who we are and looking inside, and then allowing that to be fully expressed in how we move, how we eat, how we be, how we work, how we engage in creativity and socialization. All of it is included in the midst of this conversation. Any last parting thoughts or words, anything that feels incomplete for you?
No, I mean, I think we talked about a lot of different things, and I know it's, we want it to be very simple, and we want to be able to just like in a sentence, in an hour, pull all the information together as seekers. But this is a journey of our lifetime. And people will often ask me, well, how long do I have to do this for? And I'm like, well, how long do you plan on living? And I think that I think as women, when we can stop putting harsh deadlines on when we have to achieve, complete, that whole thing, and we can really just begin to enjoy the process and this evolution of learning our bodies, I think that's when we come home to ourselves as women and we shift out of trying to look a certain way, and we really start to embody feeling a certain way. Because I've worked with many women in my life who on the outside look stunning, gorgeous, perfect. And you spend time and talk to them and they don't feel any of those things. And then I know women in my life who, maybe outwardly you wouldn't think any of those things about them, but they are whole and they are complete and they are happy and they are grounded. And we need to lead with a whole lot more kindness and grace to ourselves.
Yes, so good. So important. Thank you. I appreciate you. And for those of you that have listened, you're also, if you are listening to Jenn's podcast, I'll put the show notes in the link where she interviewed me in the last couple months.
Yeah.
I'll also include that in the show notes, and that way you can easily find Jenn's podcast.
Yeah.
With that, cheers to each and every one of you really listening in, honoring your rhythms, honoring the beautiful, spectacular, gracious, worthy woman that you are, knowing that you're dynamic and ever changing, and we all have the esteemed privilege of being fully expressed and honoring our needs. And I think that Jenn Pike is a great example of that in the work that she does in the world. And I'm grateful for you.
Well, thank you so much. I'm grateful for you and the opportunity to be here today.